friends. Welcome to the Motherhood Today podcast. We are so excited about the study that we recently released with Barna Research Group and the Mom Co. about the state of motherhood and how it impacts culture and the church. And today we're going to talk about that. But first, my friend David Kinnaman, CEO of Barna. Hi.
Hi, how's it going?
Good.
It's good to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here. We're in your hometown.
We are, Fort Worth, Texas.
Love it. I was recently talking about you with a friend.
Okay.
And this friend said that the one word that reminds her of you is mysterious. How do you feel about that? Okay, so I figure for everybody listening who's like, David Kinnaman is super mysterious, I need to ask you two quick questions.
Okay, sounds good.
Just to like get behind the veil.
Whether that sounds like an accurate description or not?
Yeah, what do you think?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the research, I've always got a number in head.
Okay,
so
what's the accuracy?
Yeah.
Are we at like 50%, 100%? What are we looking at?
I guess it depends on the category. If it's about some of the books that I like to read, then I'm not very mysterious. But other parts of my life, I guess I like a little privacy.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so I'm going to throw out two questions just to see what we're dealing with here. Favorite food?
I love good Mexican food. Great tacos, a mole sauce.
Okay. Not super mysterious.
Okay.
What makes you laugh like really hard?
Irony and things that just are really, really like interesting foibles of human nature.
Love it.
So like when people sort of make a mistake, but it's sort of like they don't intend to, but it's very funny in the circumstances. Maybe it's a social gaffe.
Okay.
I like laughing at other people's expenses, I guess. So that's probably it. No, but I do like to laugh. I think it's one of the things that has been an interesting part of my work journey because I've been a researcher and a nerd and like the guy with all the numbers. And so then you sort of have this expectation that people have like, well, you must be like, really straight-laced by the book, not all that funny. And I think I'm really funny. So that's what people, when they start to talk with me or whatever, they're like, hey, you're actually really funny. And they sort of say it like they're surprised.
I like it. We were doing YMCA earlier.
We were.
So I affirm that is true.
And see, maybe that's really part of the mystery. You think I'm just a stats guy.
So right.
But it turns out I also build Lego sets and Lego architecture sets, and I'm a hiker, and I have an actual other side of life than just all the stats.
So well-rounded. I appreciate it. Do you have Lego sets like in your house?
I do.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite one?
Well, the Lego Castle series, because they go back to my childhood, but they've updated them now with all sorts of sets that kind of suck the money out of us adult fans of Lego.
Okay.
And but just a few weekends ago, I built the Up house, which is from the Disney Pixar movie Up. And it's the little where the balloons come out of the top.
Adorable.
Yeah, and it's a really cute one. It's got the little.
Oh my goodness!
It's got Doug the dog, and Carl,
all the
and
accessories
the little
with
Boy
it.
Scout. Yeah, and the balloons. So it's a great set.
I love it. We learned a lot about David Kinnaman right now.
This episode is brought to you by Lego.com.
Okay, talking about humor and stats and the complexity of all of the research that you do. Today, we get to hear from Bryan Loritts. And it's so exciting because what we're really diving into is the pastoral side of this conversation and what the data shows for church leaders about motherhood and how we can serve moms better and how it can even help us think about evangelism differently and how moms can create exponential evangelism in the church and in our surrounding communities. Yeah. And so let's look at a little bit of the data. Will you tell us, first of all, about any of the gaps that we saw as we look at church resources for moms? What did moms say?
Well, throughout this podcast, we're trying to emphasize the ways that churches can really help to serve moms and those that care for moms. And again, I think there's some really good news in this research because it really shows how much moms care about their communities and about the churches that they're a part of. But it also shows these incredible gaps, as you say. So almost half of Christian moms say that their church never provides materials to help support them as a mother. That's a huge statistic.
Huge.
I mean, half of all church-going moms are saying that they don't see any overt effort from their church to provide materials to support them as a mom. Now, maybe that's not actually true. This is a big part of our research is perception versus reality. Sometimes we see in the research people have the wrong perception that there are, in fact, those resources, or there may be ways that they're just missing it. But that, I think, underscores the fact that it's not apparent to these moms. And that's, I think, one of the big challenges. Only 1 in 10 U.S. pastors strongly agrees that their church prioritizes mothers, which I think reflects that. And again, this is a good place for us to sort of mention that as a pastor, you have a lot of priorities, so you can't prioritize everything, right. And that's fair. But most pastors admit their church never offers materials specifically for mothers, or does so less often than every 6 months. So there is a little bit of fire behind the smoke that we see with the percentage of moms who say their church never provides those kinds of mothering materials.
Mm-hmm. And can you talk a little bit more about perspective and the stats around that? Like moms' perspective on pastoral support. What are they feeling and seeing? What does that look like?
Another big part of our research is to try to provide the kind of emotional context for what people are experiencing. I think it's one of the things that research is pretty good at, to tell us what people are experiencing emotionally. And so in this case, we looked at Christian moms. And again, just to underscore this for those who are, this may be the first episode they're listening to, we interviewed moms around the country and had a representative sample of moms, and then we're able to slice the data and look at Christian moms. So among the Christian moms that we interviewed, 75% believe that their pastor respects moms, but fewer mothers that we interview agree that their church leaders celebrate them as a mother, just 59%, equip them to be a better mom at 56%, or understand the unique needs of moms at 55%. And again, about 9 out of 10 pastors in Protestant churches are men. Of course, 100% of pastors and priests in Catholic churches are men, and unmarried men at that. And so there is, I think, a bit of a gender gap. But less than half agree that their pastors prioritize mothers' emotional well-being or prioritize mothers in general, so 48% and 46% respectively. And again, there's this sort of good news, bad news there. I think there's some good news that there is some ways in which churches are showing up with emotional attentiveness to moms and want to be moms. You'll hear some of that in the interview with Bryan Loritts, this idea that we want to talk a little bit about how to reach moms, but also how do you pastorally help people who aspire to be a mom or who never were able to be a mom. Or in my case, a widower. I talked with Bryan a little bit about some of those things. So how, as a pastor, do you stay emotionally connected to people who have a different set of life experiences than you do, and may, in fact, be biologically able to have children, and you're not if you're a man. So I think there's a lot of things we're trying to unpack with this research and try to scrape the surface so that pastors and church communities can be better supportive to moms and to their households.
Amazing. And I feel like everybody needs to go right now to barna.com/motherhood to learn more ways to engage with this research and pick up a copy for themselves. So tell us about Bryan.
I'm happy to. Well, he's been a friend for a long time. We actually serve on a board together for a Christian university. And I'm so honored to have interviewed him for this. He's such a brilliant mind, such an incredible communicator. He's the teaching pastor at the Summit Church. He's an award-winning author of 8 books. He has founded the Fellowship Memphis in 2003 and serves as the president of the Kainos Movement, an organization committed to seeing the multi-ethnic church become the new normal. And he has a huge passion for that in terms of ethnic diversity and sort of reconciliation. He's also the author of a book about dad, so The Dad Difference, which I think is a fantastic book. And so we're so glad to bring you the conversation with Bryan. Well, I'm joined here by my good friend, Bryan Loritts. How's it going, Bryan?
Always great being with you, David. It's going great, man.
Well, likewise, the feelings are mutual. So first, we want to just jump in with this question around how are you seeing moms show up in significant ways, and what can pastors learn about really tapping into this really underserved and underutilized resource?
Yeah, what's interesting, David, about your question is, if I look at it through the lens of solely the various places I've pastored, my response to you would be different. So what I mean by that is, for example, I pastored for years in Memphis, Tennessee. And in Memphis, Tennessee, what was the norm was single income homes, which typically what that looked like is the husband was outside of the home working, the mom was home full time. And so if I was in Memphis, I'd answer your question a lot differently. I've also pastored in New York and the Bay Area, which the norm was dual income homes. And moms are out there wearing multiple hats, killing it in the marketplace, and doing a great job with the kids as well. And so I think the first thing really for me to answer this question is I think we do a really disservice if we only look at moms through a one-dimensional prism, right? I'm in the Raleigh-Durham area right now, and it's got all these universities here, some of the highest concentrations of PhDs in the United States. There are single income homes, there's dual income homes. So trying to expand our thinking to offer things to moms that isn't cookie cutter, that doesn't try to squeeze every mom into the same lens. So I'm just flipping a switch and trying to see it from that perspective and just going, there's a lot of high capacity moms out there who want to broaden their reach from just inside the home, as important as that is. But is the church offering something for them as well to equip them for ministry?
So good. And so maybe one way to read back what I hear you saying is there may be more variability in how moms show up than in how dads show up, because there's a lot of different ways, a lot of pressure points that moms feel that dads may not be front and center to. In fact, the data from Motherhood Today, the report that we worked on with the Mom Co. actually shows that. And so what would be ways that you sort of read that differently as a pastor then? Because even as much as we're being encouraged by your comments not to read moms in a one-size-fits-all way, I would also venture to guess that moms don't want to be treated as, as a working professional doesn't want to be just treated as not having enough time for their kids, and stay-at-home moms don't want to be looked at for just sort of childcare and kind of hospitality-oriented gifts. So how do we avoid those kinds of stereotypes, and then what ways can we customize or really partner with moms given their current life circumstances?
So I would say leave the door open in our language. What I mean by that is being more inclusive in our language. I think, for example, the faith and work conversation, as crucial as that is, I think subconsciously we just cater that to men. And look, if you look at Proverbs 31, she is a mom, but she's highly entrepreneurial at the same time, right? So I just imagine the Proverbs 31 woman sitting in the pews, in the seats at our church. And so when I talk about any kind of faith and work initiatives that I'm doing, or any kind of entrepreneurial ministry or whatever, I think just opening the door, and even in our church's language, in how we communicate these things, announce these things, to be very intentional to say, this also includes any women, any mothers who are interested, and those who want to walk through that door, they can. Those who want to say, no, we're going to kind of take a time out here. That's just not where I'm at this season of life. I think a lot of this is just the language we use and not being intentional enough to say we want women to be a part of, again, faith and work initiative, whatever that may be. Does that make sense, David?
Yeah, it really does. I want to throw you a bit of a curveball, even in terms of that question of language and intentionality of including women. So speak to the reality that a lot of women they want to be moms, or they aspire to be moms, or they aspire to be married. A lot of the data shows us now that the church of yesteryear, that was primarily around married sort of traditional households, is very different. So you obviously have single parents, and you were talking earlier about single income earning households. How do you talk about the whole vocation of motherhood? People are putting off their first child, having their first child, for a lot of demographic and economic and other kinds of reasons. Is there anything we could learn just about how to speak about the topic of motherhood and becoming a mom, and maybe for those that are have an aspiration to be a mom, maybe they're struggling with infertility, or they're struggling with other questions around their own background with a mom? Are there ways that you've found that are important for us to be paying attention to as pastors when it comes to the emotional connectedness to those questions?
Oh, absolutely. So I think there's a couple pieces to this. I think one piece of it is exactly what you're talking about is, pastorally, I feel this, for example, on Mother's Day. There's always this tension I feel when I get up on Mother's Day. I want to celebrate, I want to honor mothers. But at the same time, I know on Mother's Day and Father's Day too, for that matter, there's a lot of pain there. And for some people, it is an act of incredible faith to even come to church on Mother's Day, because for some of the reasons you're talking about, they're struggling with issues of infertility, and it's like kind of ripping the scab off of the wound. And so I want to stop, and in that pastoral moment, I want to acknowledge them and just be ultra sensitive and compassionate. So that's not just for Mother's Day, I guess, whenever I talk about these issues, and to even say marriage is not the end zone, and even parenting is not the end zone. Now, it's going to seem like I'm talking on both sides of my mouth. So let me talk out of both sides of my mouth. I think there's another piece to it as well. And I think it was Rick Warren who actually made this point, and that is, totally get that having biological kids, or maybe even adopting, is not for everybody. I do think the call to discipleship, the call to invest in the next generation, is something that we don't get a pass out of. And so I always like to exhort people by saying, listen, I'm not saying you have to have kids or you have to adopt or whatever. I am saying that you're valuable. God has invested so much in you, gift-wise, experience-wise, that you have to figure out an outlet in how to pass that on into the next generations to come. And here's some potential ways you can do that. You can hop into our middle school ministry, or be a part of a Sunday school class and be part of a mentoring program. I just think every Christian needs to think that way.
Yeah, that's so good. I'm hearing you say that, and I'm also thinking about the places in Paul's writing in his pastoral epistles where he commends Timothy, for example, for the faith of his mother and grandmother, and sort of reminds him of that influence. Have you learned anything about communicating or acknowledging those things you've been talking about in terms of Mother's Day, or as you talk about motherhood? But is there anything else that is important for pastors and communicators to be speaking about these very discrete life circumstances or people that we're communicating with on a regular basis?
Yeah, absolutely. You kind of alluded to it when you brought up Paul and some of the things he wrote. If you look at his pastoral epistles, right, letters that he wrote to people like Timothy and Titus and so on, what strikes me is the scope of the audiences that he addresses, older men, older women, younger women. He even has a whole section, I think it's 1 Timothy 5, where he's talking about widows and the difference between younger widows and older widows and how to care for them. And he's talking to much smaller churches back then than what we have now. And so I even think, as a leader in the church, one of the cues that I take from Paul is to realize that sitting in a congregation at any given moment, we're just going to run the gamut of where people are. And the hard part as a communicator of the Word of God is I communicate through a very specific set of makeups, giftings, experiences. I have blinders on because I'm a man, because I'm a married man. So really trying to get coaching and trying to be extremely inclusive and affirming in my language, right? So I want singles to feel like, hey, you are extremely valuable right where you're at. I want to affirm for some of you singles who have this desire to be married, but we don't want to make that an idol. And, so you just feel like you're being pulled in a million different ways. And that stretching, I think, is incredibly redemptive, not just for the audience, but also for me as a communicator as well.
One last question on this sort of, we're here to talk about moms, but we've ended up talking quite a bit about speaking to aspiring moms or people that have questions about motherhood, et cetera. And one particular kind of thing I've seen recently on TikTok is this sort of it's the very particular video that I saw was a young woman looking at a wedding ring as though it was a kind of death sentence or a death sentence to her dreams of living a kind of independent, empowered life. And the corollary to that would be that becoming a mom essentially, sort of sentences you or constrains your freedoms. And you work with a lot of younger people because we serve on a board for an institution that serves Gen Z. So millennials, Gen Z, do you have ways of communicating or thinking about the godly good of parenting for a generation that's skeptical of the kinds of commitments that marriage and parenting bring?
Yeah, I heard one Christian leader say, and I just want to posture this as, again, this is not the end zone, but this one Christian leader said, the most significant thing that we can do is not so much the work that we do, but the kids we raise and release into the world, right? And so I think if I look at marriage, if I look at kids, or take whatever solely through the lens of this is going to infringe on my life, I don't think that's the biblical worldview, right? I think our most satisfying moments in life are tied to our deepest sacrifices. So yes, there is a dying to self that is required to have a marriage that thrives. There is a dying to self that is required as it relates to investing in children. But I can tell you, on the other side of that death is some of the deepest satisfaction. I think this is really the idea of Hebrews 12, and when it talks about Jesus and the cross, and it uses really unique language, who for the joy that was set before him. Our next interesting language, talking about a guy who's going to get on a cross and die, as painful as that is, on the other side of that is joy. Like I've always been amazed. My wife and I, we've got 3 sons. He gave birth all natural to all 3 boys. And I watched her just writhe in pain. And at some point she goes, would love to do it again. Right. So I think that's kind of an analogy, a metaphor for the parenting experience. And again, I don't want to lift this up as an idol or even remotely suggest that if you don't have kids, your life is lacking. I am saying a baseline principle to life is some of our deepest joys and satisfactions are inextricably tied to deep sacrifices. Dare I even say dying to some aspects of who we are. I'd do it all over again in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Well, I think those are very profound words. And as for our listeners, I just want to say that as I'm observing Gen Z and millennials, and from the data, this idea that we prepare them for success as parents and institutions, and even sometimes pastors and youth leaders, we sort of buy into this notion you can be all you hope to be, but we don't always prepare them for suffering. And the way of Jesus is actually a profound rescoping of what it means to suffer and to suffer alongside Christ. In fact, Christ suffers alongside us. The God of all comfort comes to comfort us in our struggles. And
but David, let me also jump in here and say this. Part of me gets it though. I think it was Tony Evans who said, and this statistic may not even be true, but he's like,
if you say it on a podcast with me, it will become true, just because that's how
absolutely.
We sprinkle some pixie statistical dust on it.
But I think the analogy he can use was, so imagine 1 out of every 2, half of all airplanes crashed. He goes, I'm going to bet you're not going to get on an airplane and fly. And he was using that as an analogy for why people are giving up on the institution of marriage. Is, part of he gets why the younger generation would have serious, deep reservations about even going the whole marriage route, is because there's probably a lot of pain, a a part of their own personal narrative and seeing broken homes. And so I get the hesitancy people are experiencing.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I think that's very well stated. And I would add just a point that being a widower now, it's been at the time of the recording almost 3 years since my wife passed. It's been interesting to again experience singleness and how people have expected certain things, like almost as though I was, my late wife, we had met in high school and dated through college and then got married and had 3 kids. And so as I've dated some and not dated some and been a bachelor and enjoyed nights alone and not enjoyed nights alone, it's interesting how people kind of have a specific way of thinking about the script for my life that's very different than if my wife had lived, and nobody comes in and gives advice around some of those things. So even how we relate to widows and widowers, even how we relate to bachelors, how we relate to single women, it's just a very interesting place to be. And again, how motherhood fits into all of this. The church is the one place where we can be best known and to re-script our lives in light of the authority of Jesus in our lives. At its best, the church is a place where we help people be insulated from the kind of judgment and unnecessary sort of social structures that I think put pressures on moms. And that's one of the headlines from this study, is that moms are really looking to the church for mental and emotional support, for relationships. They want to be in small groups. That is, in fact, the top-rated aspect of their experience with churches is community. 5th or 6th on the list is preaching. It's like way down the list in terms of what moms are looking for from church. So talk about the power of community and advice that you have about how churches can better serve moms when it comes to community.
Yeah, so I even think the community piece, it feels to me as if it's even more pronounced coming out of COVID. I work with a lot of church planters, and I tell them, get the mega church out of your mind. In some senses, mega church has always been a bit of an outlier, unless you live in Houston or Dallas. Mega churches are normal. But I tell them, get it out of their mind, because what COVID did was, if you were a content-driven church, now you're competing with some of the top-notch communicators, and people can just, brew their cup of coffee on a Sunday morning and pick out their favorite kind of speaker. But you can't podcast community. And again, I think there was this thing in which, for a lot of churches that didn't gather for stretches during COVID, there was just a deepened sense of a felt need. I need to get in community. And so continuing to offer that, but I would even say you've got to vary that. So my wife did BSF for years. And my wife, who was a stay-at-home mom, she loved BSF because it was for her felt need. Not only did it connect her with other women, but one of the things my wife felt, and she is not indicative, I would even say, of most women, was she was looking for something that was word driven, that could connect her with women, but was also extremely focused. She didn't want to chit chat a whole lot, and BSF kind of scratched that itch. There are a lot of women who we want the community and sprinkle a little bit of word on top of that. BSF is the exact opposite. I think there's room for both, and then even more so. And then even beyond the Bible studies, I was a part of a church once that just said, hey, let's just offer something that would allow us to take the kids off of a mom's hand for stretches of time during the day so they could just get a break, right? Mm-hmm. I think all of those things are deeply empowering. And again, a mom can kind of pick and choose, take and leave what they want based on where you are in your season of life.
Yeah, that's such a great idea. Any other practical suggestions for engaging moms?
Those are the immediate ones that actually come to mind. I think in general, one of the things that I'm just encouraged by, there's a lot about the women in ministry conversation that's deeply discouraging to me, but there's a lot about it that I think it's forcing us to address and confront some of our own biases and limitations in this area. And us now just being able to look out and say there's a lot of high capacity women, many of those who happen to be moms, and let us really do the work of figuring out meaningful areas in the church in which they can serve. But again, all this for me just comes back to a deeply holistic approach where we are not cookie cuttering people and really freeing them up and unleashing them to be all of whom God has empowered them to be.
That's so good. Well, as we wrap up, what's one encouraging thing either from Corey, your wife's experience, or your mom's experience, and sort of giving you a chance to give some honor where it's due?
Yeah. So look, let me kind of turn that around a little bit. I think my wife, what she would appreciate, and we've been talking about this, and so because I carry a little bit of a leadership cachet at our church, we're going to try to figure this out. She's not the type to just walk up to a young mom. So our kids are 22, 20, and 18. So we're empty nesters now. She's not the type to just walk up to a young mom and go, "Hey, I got a lot of advice to offer you," right? That's just not who she is. But she is looking for a way that would intentionally connect kind of older seasoned moms with younger moms to pour any kind of wisdom. So we're exploring what could that look like. And I think that's a meaningful conversation that I think the average church should have, and connecting people together in churches around seasons of life, and people just like, I'm in the trenches, but I really need someone who can help me. But man, I'm just extremely proud and privileged. My mom was home full time, but my wife is a child of divorce, and so she knows what it's like to have her recitals or plays, and her mom is working multiple jobs and can't show up, and her dad's not around. And so my wife made the decision, with my full support, to be home full time because she wanted to be there for the kids. And of course, that's a decision she never regretted at all. And so they're just my heroes in a million different ways. So
yeah. Well, that's great. Thanks for sharing those personal details. Well, Bryan, it's always a pleasure to see you. And again, thanks for your friendship and for journeying alongside me personally these last number of years, and then for being on the podcast today.
Thanks, David. Always enjoy to be with you, and I'll see you in a couple months.
Sounds good. Well, that's Bryan Loritts, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks again for joining us. Well, it was a super fun conversation with Bryan. I hope you all enjoyed that. Again, it was one of these interesting conversations where my experience as a widower really informed some of the questions I wanted to ask him, and then also talking with other widows and other women and men who are single who never have had kids. It's been an interesting journey for me the last 3 years, sort of being in this new space. And because Bryan's such a good friend, I think some of that personal side came out. And so anyway, I'm just curious how you think about that at the MomCo and with MOPS in general. Obviously, we're working with moms. We're talking about motherhood today, but motherhood actually impacts on everyone because we all have a mother. We all have some relationship to mothers in some way. And some people really have this area of really deep hurt, right? Like they either have moms that they're not reconciled with, or they have a bad relationship with them, or they have a lot of pain when it comes to their story of aspiring to be a mom, right? So how do you think about that? What are some of your your ways of addressing some of those things within the work you do, or just your own response.
Yeah, I think motherhood as a concept is complex, even as a mom myself, right? There are things that you love about motherhood and then other things that there's a lot of guilt or shame around. I really love in Scripture how God even describes himself in the terms equated with motherhood. And so I think even for those of us who aren't moms or who want to be a mom, or I think we can still mother our friends, mother the world, mother each other in really profound and significant ways.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to equate with giving birth or adopting a baby. So I think it's a really beautiful concept that God models to us that doesn't have to equate with physically being a parent.
Yeah. Well, and I love this about the church because it's the one place where we get to be who we are in Christ first, and not necessarily any of our
other identities,
check marks of identity as a mom or a man or a woman or a generation or our socioeconomic location, whatever. So I think this has been a fun conversation with Bryan. I hope it spurred you on to thinking about how you show up in all phases of ministry. And I think it's actually a way forward for pastors too, because it shows that it's not just about sort of segmented ministry, like what are we doing for moms, what are we doing for dads, what are we doing for this segment, but how do we minister to everyone holistically? And I think moms are really asking for that from their churches.
Agreed. That was such a good conversation, David. You did such a brilliant job. So everybody, make sure to check out Bryan's book, The Dad Difference. Brilliant. The foremost gifts you can give to your kids, and it's available wherever books are sold. And so make sure to subscribe, like this podcast, give us feedback. We can't wait to see you next time.